and we'll begin. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar series, Hot Topics in Texas Digital Higher Education. Our hot topic today is leading online learning in a landscape of unpredictability. I'm Judith Sebesta, Executive Director of the Digital Higher Education Consortium of Texas, also known as Digitex because that is a mouthful. This webinar today will be recorded, archived, and available on the Digitex YouTube channel, but we'll also be sending it out on our Digitex Google group, and those who register today will receive a link to the recording as well. We also have a very brief survey that we would like to ask you to complete, and our wonderful program coordinator, Heather Walker, will be putting the link to that survey into the chat towards the end of the webinar today. So we would really appreciate it if you take a moment to fill that survey out. We also have a question in there that asks if there are any webinar topics that you might like to see us focus on in this series. So please, if you have any, we will be all ears. So thank you very much for taking a little bit of time to submit that survey. I also want to thank Nicole Throne from Caption Sync for providing our captioning today. Leaders of online learning have found themselves thrust into the spotlight more than ever during COVID-19. And that spotlight has grown even brighter as colleges consider their new normal moving forward. This crisis and planning for its aftermath have made these administrators truly essential personnel on their campuses. We at Digitex want to honor and recognize their work and mine it for lessons learned. So today, we have assembled 4 very distinguished leaders at community colleges across Texas to reflect on the challenges, the opportunities, and the rewards of leading online learning in this landscape of great unpredictability. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our 4 panelists today. Dr. Erasmus Addae, who serves as the Associate Vice President of Distance Education at Austin Community College and who happens to be my boss. Dr. Terry Paolo, who is Vice Provost of e-learning at Dallas College. Dr. Elizabeth Rodriguez, who is Dean of Academic Innovation and Technology at Laredo College, and that is a new title for her. Congratulations for the promotion, Dr. Rodriguez. And last but definitely not least, Dr. Miles Young, Director of Distance Education and Dual Credit at Northeast Texas Community College. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now because really we don't have slides today. We just want to have a really good conversation about the challenges, rewards, opportunities that these professionals have faced over the past year. I'd like to start by asking each of our panelists, we'll start with you, Erasmus, if that's okay, to briefly describe one challenge and one opportunity in online learning that have arisen for you over the past year.
Well, Judith, before I go ahead and do that, thanks for the introduction, but I wish you hadn't said that to your boss. So the challenges and opportunities have been many, right? But we have experienced specifically technology infrastructure challenges, digital divide challenges, for example, the compatibility of online learning with disciplines where hands-on practical experiences are required as part of instructional activities. But for me, I'll focus on the heavy workload and resulting mental health challenges experienced by every single staff in my department, the college as a whole, faculty, and even students. Now, the quick and sudden digital transformation process placed a huge workload on staff to build new applications, integrate existing external applications into new systems, and provide professional development to faculty, as well as migrate courses to the virtual environment. That's a lot to ask of anybody in the shortest period of time. Our faculty also shared part of the huge workload, like previously said, because they were called upon to transform their course content to be online friendly. Now, but prior to the pandemic, we had which to have everybody make use of online learning tools. While the pandemic presented that opportunity, faculty, staff, and students have made best use of opportunity offered by the pandemic. There has been very high level of collaboration, and that is for the opportunities that I can think of that came about during the pandemic. You said briefly, I think I went past briefly, and so I'll pass the baton back on to you.
That's no problem at all, Erasmus, because I think you touched on, a couple of things that all of us can empathize and understand. And Elizabeth, why don't I go to you?
Thank you. Thank you again, Judy, for allowing me the opportunity to share what Laredo College has been through. And I think, like Dr. Erasmus said, we face some of those challenges as well. But I think I'd like to focus a little bit on the challenges that students face, right? We all know that a lot of our faculty had to quickly transition to online. We have been fortunate enough to have a lot of our faculty already trained to teach online. A lot of our courses were already in our learning management system. And I'm not downgrading what my team and I had to do when we transitioned everybody online, because we had to also not only our academics, but we had to work with workforce and with continuing ed to get all those folks fully online. But I think also we need to see, the challenges that students face during this time and what we here at Laredo College were able to do to help them in the transition to fully online. And so in our area, a lot of our students don't have internet access at home. And so that was one of the biggest things that we saw here at Laredo College. And another thing was that they didn't have the device. They didn't have a device to be able, they don't have internet, but they don't have devices either to be able to log on and continue their courses online. And so what we had to do is we had to develop a plan, right, to help our students continue to be successful as we transitioned fully online. So along with our student support services and the IT department, we started to issue out laptops to all of our students. And so we started to spread the word to make sure that students knew if they didn't have a device, they can come and check one out here at the college. And then we also started putting mobile hotspots. I know that we had some in our parking lot, so students could come drive to the campus. They couldn't get off, the campus was closed, but at least they were able to access, their courses by connecting to our hotspots. And so for me, even though I know faculty were challenged, but our faculty are champions. They really, a lot of them stepped up to the plate. We had a lot of peer mentoring. So my team alone wasn't the only ones trying to help everybody transition to online, but we had a lot of support from, faculty who've been teaching online for a long time. And we're fortunate enough, again, we've been Quality Matters for a long time. So our courses are well developed, well designed. We already had a faculty e-learning academy in place for, to transition faculty to teach online. But I think a lot of focus, was lost on our students, right? We could have probably done a lot more for them. And I think moving forward, that's one of the things that I want to focus more on, how we can support our students through this, because, even though we kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel a little bit, we still don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty. And I want to make sure that if we have to go fully online, have a lockdown again, or whatever may happen in the future, that we provide more support to our students because they do need a lot of support to succeed in the online environment.
Elizabeth, I sure do appreciate the emphasis on students, and you made a very salient point that it's not over yet. And the fact of the matter is we don't know what the next crisis will be beyond this.
Right. Because we had the winter storm, right? And so I know that affected Laredo in a great way, because we're not used to that sort of cold. And so we had to stay home. We had to work from home during the winter storm. And so fortunately, we were already fully online. So it didn't impact us at all. But, just like COVID and the winter storm, we don't know what other things are down, in the future, right? We can expect anything at this point.
Yes.
But I think we need to focus more on how we can support our students more than anything.
Well said. Well said. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Miles, why don't I go to you?
Well, I want to first echo my colleagues and my thanks for the invitation to be here and visit with you guys and kind of learn from y'all as well. I'll also echo the challenges, especially around the notions of access. And something that I can add to that I think is important is a great deal of our students are still in high school. And so the access issues that kind of touched them were in many ways as profound, if not more so, for our full-time students. And so device access issues, internet access issues, we're in a rural part of the state. And so at the outset, that's challenging on its own, but you add a pandemic to it, an overnight switch to online distance models and that kind of thing kind of pours gas on the situation. But in terms of an opportunity, I think that gave us an opportunity to work more closely with our K through 12 partners and to kind of be in their world a little bit more, them being in our world a little bit more, and us work even more closely together in support of our students, which is so necessary, especially among community colleges in the state. And so from my vantage point, yes, access and these types of things were very challenging. But on the other hand, we had the opportunity to not only further nurture the relationships we have with our partners, our professional partners, but also with our students, because I think when you take care of your students, they know that, they feel that, and they respond in kind. And so any way that we can do that better, like Dr. Rodriguez said, I think is a tremendous opportunity, no matter what the crisis is that surrounds it. If there's a crisis at all. So I think that's kind of how I would respond to that from our vantage point.
Well said, Miles. And Erasmus mentioned the word collaboration, and we might want to think of collaboration not just being among our colleagues, staff, administrators, faculty, but with students as well, right?
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Judith, sorry, were you prompting?
Yeah, your turn.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Judith and team, for inviting me to be with you. Looking forward to the conversation, and it's been a joy to hear about colleagues' own experience during the last year or so. I think it resonates with a number of leaders in the space, and I don't know if I want to add to what's been said already around the steps we've taken, but I think the piece I would add is, I think the biggest challenge, not from addressing issues, but actually from a leadership perspective, has been a shift in leadership. Because it's felt like the last year, the last 18 months has really been, if you're working in the online space, has really been around leadership of crisis management, and all the things that go along with crisis management. And part of that is kind of the movement from not just one major global crisis, but the little minor mini crises that happen along the way. And so I think what you've seen is a real growth in the talent, the leaders around online learning and teaching around this piece of crisis management through this. That's been a real opportunity. It's really kind of led people, and I can talk to for my own self, and I hope colleagues get a chance to respond, but I think there has been this piece where we have never been stretched in these kinds of ways by the last 18 months as leaders in the online space. And I think the other thing as well is we've not just had to react and respond. I think a real challenge has also been listening to a range of accounts and stories that have meant we as leaders have really had to change operational activity. Those have been hard to hear, but I think the opportunities they've created is, I think we all want to move away from being reactive and responding to crisis to now beginning the work of proactive planning, proactive strategy. That means if something like this happens again, we're prepared. Elizabeth mentioned the snow event we had earlier this year. I'm sure it hit everyone on this call in very different ways. A rhetorical question. Would we have dealt with it differently if we hadn't had COVID to deal with prior? And my sense is a lot of us dealt with the situation the way we did very well because we'd been prepped by the management of the crisis that came along with COVID.
Very good, Terry. You know, although I will say that for some of us, and it was me included, that was a different crisis force because we didn't have. So that really, you know, literally shut things down for the institution where I'm based, and I'm sure for many others. But Terry, that's a, you know, that's a great segue into another question I had. Before I do the segue, making it not quite as elegant a segue as I wish it would have been, I do want to say to all of our attendees, please, if you have questions for our panelists, feel free to put them into chat, and we will get to as many as we can before the close of the webinar today. But I am going to take moderator's privilege and ask a few of my own questions first, and then I'll keep an eye on the chat and let's see what we have come in from our attendees, or questions that you all may have for each other, panelists. But Terry, related to what you were saying, and you actually already said answered this a little bit, but what competencies as a leader have you had to learn or unlearn in the face of the crises this past year?
The one that comes to mind, for me at least, is listening. I always thought I was good at listening, but I don't think you can operate in this space just by being good at listening. You now have to do a whole set of associated tasks, and it's a different type of listening. I think one of the things that the pandemic has changed for us all is we're in a constant mode of triaging priorities. I don't see that changing in the near future, but there are a continuing set of competing priorities we have to deal with, and they stretch across federal requirements, regulatory requirements, accreditation requirements. They stretch to how best serve our community, how best to serve subpopulations in our community, how to serve the faculty population as a whole and sub-communities within that population. One of the key things for me during the last year or so, in terms of that listening piece and in terms of that really listening, was for the first time, I really listened to the needs of our career and technical faculty as being distinct and different from the needs of faculty teaching in our transfer and general education program. I had a notion of those differences, but when you're sitting down having tough conversations with faculty about the real constraints they face, you know, and the opportunities they feel that are shut down for them because of their own discipline or the topics they teach, you really have to listen and think about your response, because their problems are just as important as the English 1301 or the Psych 2301, but your solution is going to be far harder to kind of come to in trying to meet their needs. So listening has been a huge thing for me as a leader over the last 18 months.
Thank you, Terry. Elizabeth, Erasmus, Miles, what about you all?
Well, I'm sorry.
So I think I'll echo what Terry said. Similarly, it's been, apart from listening, it's also been for me to sharpen my skills on acquiring cultural sensitivity and also becoming aware of the emotions of the people that I work with and the stakeholders that I work with on a daily basis. And Elizabeth said it right in the past. It is not an exaggeration to suggest that in the future, we will increasingly have to manage within similar environments and unforeseen change, but also unthinkable change. It's coming. I mean, this is not going to be the last. So managing in the unknown will increasingly come to characterize leadership in the online learning space, just like Terry did say previously. So the past year has been challenging. One, for everyone, stress, anxiety have been high. So I have learned to be able to adapt, right? To be flexible, revising operations effectively to meet changing environments and sweeping reforms that are coming on a daily basis. and navigating individual and collective emotions with compassion and empathy. This is all things that, that we have learned to do for the past 18 months. Otherwise, there's no way we are going to be able to meet the challenges that are thrown at us during the pandemic.
Empathy seems like such a crucial word, Erasmus. I'm glad you brought that up. Elizabeth, what were you going to say?
And actually, that's what I was going to say, right? That was my biggest lesson, right? To really become empathetic, and more than anything to my team, right? Because we were, when the pandemic started, all eyes were on us. What are we going to do to transition everybody fully online? And, you know, that was a huge weight on my shoulders, right? Because I felt like if my team and I didn't succeed, then the college wasn't going to be successful, right? And so, but during that time, during the amount, I mean, our work quadrupled. And the first, we were only, we stayed home and worked remotely for about a month and a half. And then my team and I came back on campus because we just needed to be here on campus. You know, the campus was closed, but I needed to make sure that my team knew that they had a strong leader, that they had a leader that they could turn to, and that together we were going to transition and do what we needed to do to move everybody fully online, to train faculty who had never taught online, to assist students to be successful in the online environment. And so really listening to my team, because if my team and I, and the way I saw it was, if my team and I were not successful, then we were going to be, I personally would be letting down the college. And for me, that was huge, right? I wanted to, you know, I've been an advocate of online education, you know, pretty much my entire, you know, educational journey, right? And so everything that I've learned, now I had to really put it into motion, but also knowing that my team needed me to be empathetic to their needs. And because of that, I think that's how we were able to succeed and to, you know, transition faculty online. Because if I was there for my team, then we could be there for the faculty, right? Because the faculty was counting on us. They didn't know what they were going to do. They didn't even know how they were going to go about things. And so I needed my team to really know that, you know, I had their back, that I was empathetic to their needs, because we were all going, you know, during the pandemic, we're all going through different types of emotions, right? Because some of us got affected directly, you know, because of COVID, some of us may not have. And so I needed to, you know, we had people coming in and out because, you know, just different situations. And so we had to be really empathetic to be able to succeed in what we were going to be able to do, you know, during this whole, you know, pandemic thing. And so I think that was the biggest thing for me, is just really, and kind of what Terry said also, right? Having that listening ear, you know, and making sure that we're here together as a team, and we're going to get together. We're going to get through this together, not only for my team, but for the faculty and for the students and for the college as a whole, right? This is what we've been, and I would tell my team this, and this is what we're about, right? This is what we've been preparing. This is what, you know, we've always wanted, to be fully online. Well, here we are now, right? And together we're going to get through this. And so that for me was the biggest thing.
But, you know, Elizabeth, I would just really like to pause and recognize the pressure that those of you who lead these distance education online learning units have been under. I mean, you know, I called it a spotlight before, but let's face it, it's been surely an enormous amount of pressure, enormous amount of expectation. And I just say kudos to you. And I know that many of our attendees have, if not all, have felt that pressure as well. And, you know, Terry and Miles, I also want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about competencies. But Terry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say to that, absolutely, I think leaders have been stretched. I don't want to lose sight of how stretched everyone working in e-learning has been by this. And I think one of the competencies, you were asking this question about the competencies that have developed and evolved. I think the other thing as well is it's made me kind of be very cognizant and in the moment with what my teams are doing now, recognizing the hard work they put in and I would say this, maybe I'm not saying this in the right way, but in ways that I maybe didn't in the past, because the commitment of and our teams are diverse. We have a range of different staff members. You know, a lot of people thought about the pandemic being kind of the story of instructional designers talking with faculty, absolutely. But it was a whole host of different staff across the online space, working with student support, with, you know, a whole host of people. And the beauty about working in the spaces we do, particularly I think in community colleges, is how willing people are to flex to the needs of our students and our colleagues, you know, and, you know, the commitment they make. And so one of the things I've been very conscious of and really kind of thought about this summer is ensuring my teams take time off, because that was a piece that was, burnout was a real aspect of the experience for many, leaders included. And I think now our responsibilities have shifted. We've talked about these changes not going away. Well, there's a new responsibility, a set of responsibilities I feel we have to the teams we lead, and ensuring that, yeah, great work is being done, but we're also attending to people's well-being.
Right.
So well said, Terry. And I'd like to bounce it over to Miles in case he wanted to respond to this. But Miles, also, let's put a second part to this in relation to something Terry just said, and that is, how have you all avoided burnout for yourselves? So Terry, if you want to talk a little bit about competencies, but also then maybe you know, start this conversation of how you as leaders have prevented burnout. And I'd like to also invite our attendees, if anyone wants to just throw in a chat, what have been your coping strategies? How have you yourselves avoided burnout? Let's maybe share some ideas in that respect. But Miles, let's go to you.
Yeah, so something I've heard kind of as a similar thread in everybody's comments, and everybody's comments has been very, very, very valuable. But to me, I kind of land on this broader notion of relationships. You know, if you think about if this were precedented times, okay, for those of us in leadership positions, being mindful and cognizant of relationships, not just with colleagues, folks, and where people are and how important it is to recognize that. Again, in precedented times, think about the relationships that we have and we try our hardest to foster with our students. Something that I do as part of Quality Matters, I'm a real big proponent of doing everything I can as a faculty member, as an administrator, to identify ways to build rapport with students in an online environment. Guys, that in and of itself is hard enough. You throw a pandemic into the mix or a snowstorm or whatever, being mindful and cognizant of relationships when everybody's scattered to the winds and we're not together face to face collectively 5 times, sometimes more a week. How do we keep in mind and maintain those relationships, which are so important for us in our own institutions in terms of culture and those types of things, but also for our students who need us, who rely on us to get information to them timely, to give them feedback, to give them support, whatever else. The notions of empathy and listening and emotional intelligence and all of those things summed up into a relational bow, if you will, and being mindful of that from the leader's chair as things like this progress and catch legs and change and everything else. To me, that only becomes more important. And so from a competency standpoint, I try to always look and see how can I relate better to everybody, whether they're a subordinate, whether they're a superior, whether they're a student, whether they're a parent. How can that only be made more strong, if you will?
Well said, Miles. Well said. Does anyone want to respond to that or contribute to the conversation about how to avoid burnout?
Yes, I'd like to do that before I go ahead, I'd like to also emphasize what Miles said about building relationships. And over the years, I have learned that in this line of job, you have to build relationships and alliance all the way from student government all the way to faculty senate or faculty associations, and then up to the cabinet level. You build those relationships to be able to be successful in what you do. And so, Miles, you hit right on the nail. As the way of coping, well, I wanted to be humorous about that, but drinking lots of water, right? But throughout the pandemic, something that I started doing to cope was to walk a lot in the evenings. I started walking over 5 miles on a daily basis. Yes, and it's become part of my routine now. And that's how I've been able to cope and to prevent burnout. Now, in terms of my staff, I have always encouraged them to take time off, because while I've been trying to take care of myself, I also want to take care of my staff and not overload them, because as it is, everybody is overloaded already. And so I have encouraged them to take time off. Sometimes I have awarded time off to recognize the effort that they are putting in to go out and take care of themselves. So yeah, that's how I've done it.
I can attest to the fact that you do urge your employees to take time off and to help avoid burnout. And I think, Erasmus, I think you may know, I'm a big walker as well. I always have been, mostly with my dogs. I don't know, do you remember when the pandemic started, one of the at least positive things that I noticed fairly early on were how more people were out with their children, with their dogs. It really was just a kind of a positive light that I saw in the midst of quite a bit of darkness at that time back then. So I'm glad you mentioned that. But Elizabeth, any thoughts?
Well, one of the, and I don't think I did anything to try to avoid the burnout, especially when we were working remote. I know my team, I was at the final stages of my dissertation as well, right? So here I am having to figure out how to get everybody fully online, working, our workload quadrupled, and I was working on my dissertation. And I even thought of, maybe I need to put that aside for a while, but that wasn't really an option. So I really did, I think the only thing I would do is I would go out, every so often. I have 3 dogs at home, and I would take them outside to the backyard, and I would water the plants. They got real pretty while we were quarantined. But also for my staff, I would be at home and I would see emails, coming back and forth at 9, 10 o'clock at night. And I would tell them, you guys need to stop, right? Even though we're working from home, that doesn't mean that you have to respond to emails at all hours of the day and at all hours of the night. When we work in the office, we get there at a certain time and then we leave at the end of the day. And that's it. You don't respond to emails or anything until you come back the following day. And so I had to keep reminding them to do that, because, I would see emails again at all hours of the night. And I know one of my staff members would even put timers on them so I didn't know that she was working overtime, and so not only for myself, but also for them, I had to keep reminding them that, at the end of the day, you leave whatever area that you're in at home and walk away from there, right? And don't go back to your computer. Now it's family time, it's your time. Because I told them, what's going to end up happening is you're going to get to a point where you're going to be completely burned out. And then what? I need you in good, health. I need you not burned out. So, even though we're working from home, at the end of the day, you walk away, right? And that's what I would constantly remind them to do. One of the things I did to try to balance, work and my dissertation at the time was that I would only work on my dissertation on a couple of days per week. And I wouldn't work on it every day. And I would leave, I have a home office, I would step out of the office. And if today wasn't the day for me to work on my dissertation, I was not going to work on it, because just sitting in front of the computer can burn you out in other ways, right? And so just trying to balance that, walking outside, like you said, Judy, walking outside. I've always exercised. So one of the first things I would do in the morning before I would go into my home office was exercise. I would spend an hour in my garage exercising, doing what I normally would do. and just trying to balance that, right? And also more than anything, reminding my staff, at the end of the day, you walk away from your computer, don't look at it again until the following day, right? Because that burnout, if we're not all 100%, then how are we going to accomplish what administration and everybody else is needing for us to accomplish, right?
Well, Elizabeth, I think it's just amazing how you had the discipline to compartmentalize those aspects of the work that you do. And I just, congratulations on completing your dissertation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I just add, I mean, you guys are all talking about being outside and walking 5 miles and all this stuff. I was on the couch watching the Game Show Network. I'll be very honest about that. I've mentioned that several times before, but to not be outside at all and plug into Match Game 75 or Family Feud or whatever, and be mentally engaged in that kind of stuff was therapy for me, and it remains therapy to this day. So kudos to you guys for the exercise. I appreciate that, but anyway.
Miles, I put into the chat, you might not have seen, but yes, I was walking my the other time, what I was doing was binging TV and film. I'm a huge film buff, so I have a lot of time on the sofa myself, and I still do. I shouldn't say past tense. But
so bad then. Thank you.
I do that as well, so don't feel bad. Especially now, I don't have a dissertation to worry about, so I can watch Netflix. I get home from work, I'm like, I don't have anything to do. I'm gonna sit on my sofa and watch Netflix.
There you go.
Well, then, so can we make a bit of a leap then and go from the professional to some kind of bigger logistical strategic issues that your college has faced and might continue to face? And also just let me mention, please, attendees, feel free to put any questions you may have, because I'm just about to run out of the ones I had right at the top of my head. So please let us know if you have any questions. But just have your college's strategic plan shifted in any significant way or insignificant? Have they in the past? Are they moving forward? And what is your place going to be within that as a leader in distance education and online learning?
So I can start that. Our strategic plan really has not changed because our QEP is digital connections, right? So we were already starting to shift the mindset of our faculty and of our students to become more of an innovative, forward-thinking community college, incorporating technology, not only in the online environment, but also in the classroom, in our face-to-face courses. And so this just catapulted what we had already started doing, right? And the e-learning department has always played an important role in moving our QEP forward. And so, I think COVID, if anything, COVID has given us an opportunity to really focus on becoming more innovative and leveraging the technology that is out there. Again, not only in our online environment, but also in our face-to-face classrooms, especially as we see, the younger generation coming. We want to make sure that they, don't sit in a lecture hall and listen to a faculty member lecture for an hour and a half. Right? We need to make sure that we incorporate some sort of, technology, make the class more interactive, more innovative. And so again, our QEP is about that. And so, COVID just gave us an opportunity to continue moving towards that direction, and really not that we were not going to give faculty an option whether they wanted to leverage technology in the classroom or not. But, if COVID taught us anything, is that technology does work. Right? Online education does work. For all of those people who thought it didn't, it does work, right? And now it's just incorporating some sort of technology within the classroom to continue. I tell my faculty and my administration all the time, my hope, and I want to say after COVID is gone, right? But we know that that's really not a realistic statement. But my hope, after we get back to some sense of normal, is that faculty and students don't go back to the way things used to be prior to COVID, right? Let's continue leveraging the technology, and let's continue moving forward and really become that innovative, community college that we hope to be one day, right? This was an opportunity, at least in my opinion. I know that there was a lot of that came from COVID, but a lot of opportunity also came from COVID, and let's take advantage of that opportunity. And so, That's what we hope to do here, at least in my opinion, at Laredo College.
I'm glad that you brought up the face-to-face learning environments, because what I hope is that we will have an increased focus on quality in face-to-face learning environments.
Right. And that's the hope, right? Because we trained so many faculty who had not gone through the applying the QM rubric. We put everybody through the applying the rubric. And so my hope is that even after they go back into their face-to-face class, that they would have learned something and they can incorporate it into their face-to-face environment and continue using the learning management system to deliver their exams online, and to, again, to continue leveraging the technology and not go back to the way things used to be, right? That would be such a shame, and it would make me personally, it would make me very sad, right? Because we've trained you, we've moved from A to, maybe not Z, but we're getting close to Z. Let's not go back. Let's continue moving forward and continue being more innovative and adding more technology as we move forward.
And I'll just interject one more thing, and then I'd like to move on to Erasmus, Miles, and Terry on this topic. But a big challenge for us, though, as we all know, is the regulatory environment, particularly the federal environment that places focus on quality in online learning. But from what I can tell, places no focus on quality in face-to-face learning environments. It's incredibly frustrating, and it needs to change. But go, Terry.
Yes, that's true. So what we've heard from our faculty is the application of the professional development they are acquiring from teaching online to teaching in the face-to-face environment. And, many of our faculty go through our online course Redesign Academy and apply the same principles in the classroom to teach their online classes. But in terms of strategic planning and shift, if any, I would say thank God that we did have a strategic plan in place for distance education at ACC. So what has happened is acceleration of what we already had in place. We've seen the pandemic hit, and for every institution, I think we've seen about 10 years worth of acceleration in a period of 18 months, if that's not an understatement. So for us, the shift we are seeing is an acceleration. And so we continue to build our online programs, and also continue to implement our quality measures in the institution, extending and providing and strengthening student support services for our students, right? And then through that, as part of that effort, we did get a grant from DOE to strengthen the support for students. And the college has also been very generous in providing the resources and funding to accelerate or to keep up with the acceleration that we are experiencing. Now, one thing that I'll say is that the pandemic has also brought to the fore the importance of online learning education. Now, in the past, I'm sure that the leaders here in this panel discussion will attest to the fact that online learning tend to be an afterthought in certain institutions. But I think with the pandemic, it's been brought to the fore, and administration at the cabinet level are giving the necessary attention that online learning deserves. And part of that in ACC is our current chancellor's priorities, right? Our chancellor, yes, number 3 on the chancellor's priorities is to provide an exceptional online learning for our students. And so resources, funding, it's being allocated to that to make sure that those priorities and objectives are met.
Thanks, Erasmus. Terry, Miles, any thoughts on how plans have shifted or will shift? Or
so I was thinking about this conundrum about where do we go forward, and one of the things that struck me, and you know, throughout this conversation, we've been talking about course design. We've been talking about rubrics that aid course design. And I think what I was hearing from across my institution and my community was, we're beyond a conversation now of course design. We really need to be talking about teaching effectiveness. And my own kind of take, unpopular though it might be, is rubrics aid us to a point, but the rubrics available to us right now do not aid us effectively in effective teaching practice online. You know, and I think the piece is, for me, is, and colleagues may disagree, but what I'm drawn to is, how is it that we are nearly 4 decades on, 3-4 decades on from the origins of online learning, and we have new regulations coming in July 1st, 2021, which prescribe regular and substantive interaction. You know, they prescribe the notion of effective teaching online. And I think that is something all leaders, all of us working in an online space, really need to reflect on, that we're having to kind of attend to federal regulation around effective teaching. And I think there's been this distorted narrative that if we got the course design right, we were good and done. And the reality, it's not. It really does matter about the human behind the computer, their interaction with their students, the regularity of it, the nature of it, the personability of that kind of interaction. And this week, new regulations come into effect. And I think all institutions, not just across Texas, but across this nation, are going to be vexed, challenged by those regulations and what they mean for the practices of some of their instructors. Luckily, it's a minority, but it's something that, you know, these are one of these kinds of emerging challenges in this kind of space that as leaders, we're all needing to attend to and flex to.
Well said, Terry. Even as, you know, from what I've seen from the change in the regulations that are coming into effect tomorrow, is that there's still ambiguity that we're responding and commenting on them, said, can you just tell us exactly what regular means, exactly what substantive means? And there's still a great deal of ambiguity. And again, I say, and we're still not saying that needs to happen in face-to-face courses, regular substantive regulation. As I put in the chat, I recognize that accreditation is an attempt at assuring quality learning everywhere, but we all know that online learning has increased scrutiny. So, Miles, any thoughts on this subject?
I just, at the outset, want to echo what Terry is saying 100%. I hate that it had to be mandated, if you will, that we look at teaching effectiveness. I wish it was something more intrinsic and it amongst us as professionals. And I go back to my comments about assessing QM courses, which is a design issue. I understand that, but through the design aspect, looking for ways to establish rapport and connection with students when they're not physically in the room. And as important as that is, Judy, as you're pointing out, that's important in the classroom too. That's everywhere. That touches the whole thing. So I greatly appreciate those comments. Absolutely. From our own perspective in strategic planning, we have a goal in our strategic plan, our most recent strategic plan, that focuses on sustainable growth. And one of the objectives in that goal has to do with increasing opportunities for online learning. And I think the pandemic has clarified that in many ways, because we now know better what that might look like for us, and what that might look like for us in the classroom, out of the classroom, hybrid models, high flex models, sync models, everything that we've been through over the last year. How do we clarify those and other ways of leveraging online to reach students? And so I don't know that there's been a significant change, but I think our thinking has changed in terms of how we approach objectives like that in strategic plans, like many of you have, I'm sure. So those are just my thoughts on that.
I would just like to add briefly that to what Terry was saying about effective, teaching strategies. A lot of our, and I speak for our faculty, right? But a lot of faculty, I think prior to COVID, felt that teaching online was easy, right? And like someone mentioned, it was an afterthought. At some point here at the college, being able to teach an online course was just an overload, right? They had to make their face-to-face load, and if they were lucky to get one online course overload, they were excited about it. But they just let that course coast, right? They would, like I always say, they put it on autopilot, and then the student is on their own in the online environment. And one of the things that I always tell faculty is, if you teach effectively in the online environment, is going to be a lot harder than what you do in the face-to-face environment, if you're doing it correctly, right? And I just like to briefly add, my dissertation, one of the questions, I did it on our online student orientation. And the most important thing for an online student is faculty presence. That's what they rated the #1 thing that they want to see in an online environment, not the navigation of the course, not peer-to-peer engagement. Actually, peer-to-peer engagement was #2, but the #1 thing that online students want to see in the online environment is a faculty member, somebody behind that computer screen, somebody that they can reach out to, and there's a real person behind that computer screen. And yeah, Quality Matters does a great thing to for the design of the course, but we need to start thinking about how we can add how we can help faculty really understand how to effectively teach in an online environment, right, for the sake of our students.
It's back to that term relationships, isn't it? I just saw some research. It's like, and the news is, in other news, the sky is blue this week, that relationships between faculty and students are the most impactful thing that students mention about their education. Erasmus, I think you were.
Yeah, so I was just going to say to Tariq's point, that I was having a conversation with one of our deans in the institution who shared with me that, hey, we were having a discussion about growth in online learning and the fact that things need to change, especially in terms of effective teaching. And this is what he said: have you recognized that every industry has changed, but higher education has been slow to any change? Even in the online learning sphere, it's taking a catastrophic event like the pandemic to see a slight movement and shift in that. And so for me, on my part, I think I remain hopeful that we have learned lots of lessons from this pandemic, and that is going to propel lots of changes in the online learning environment without us having to wait for further directions from the federal government.
Well said, Erasmus. Let me just one more time invite, I haven't seen any questions come from the attendees in the chat. So we've got just about 7-8 minutes left. I didn't know if maybe, or no, more like 6 minutes. I didn't know if maybe you panelists had a question for each other that you wanted to pose, or any last thoughts, I guess we could say.
I think just to add some final thoughts, I think one of the, and just to feed on Erasmus's points, I think that's a really pertinent point, this piece about the evolution of online learning in this kind of constrained kind of space. I think an opportunity is that I think we're all being more innovative and experimental with what we do. That's a really, really good thing. From those working in centers of teaching and learning, online learning shops, to faculty, schools, that kind of thing. I think, though, we're in danger of perpetuating this notion of an online course is an online course, and we've got to focus on an online course, and not about the experience for students across programs, across our institution, beyond the course, outside the course, those kinds of pieces. Our responsibilities do not start and end with courses. They start with our communities and students, and their needs are not individual courses. They are experiences and programs that elevate aspiration and provide opportunities to gain credentials that give them access to wages that provide a quality of life. All of us have those responsibilities. If we work in higher education, regardless of your role, from kind of faculty, staff, administrators, those are our collective responsibilities. And there are responsibilities in the online space. What I think one of the pieces we focused on, though, is what happens in a course, what an instructor does. And we have to elevate that language within our institutions. We have to elevate that conversation to include other stakeholders and a broader lens of the experience of our students.
And might a part of that be, Terry, getting rid of the binary language of face-to-face versus online? It's no longer a binary. It together. There's many different categories of hybrid and high flex and blended, and you know. Yeah,
and Judith, I mean, a point you've made, and I think I agree with the point being made, but we don't. There's this attention to quality is not something you see in face-to-face. Does it matter? You know, the pieces that we have to care in the spaces we kind of orient in to the quality of online, you know, and what that means for our students and our community. And I think that's the other thing, what it means for our community. Because in Dallas, in my community, if I get one student that has a horrible experience, a terrible experience in that one course, and they're the first from their family, not only do I potentially wreck that student's trajectory through education, their story ripples out into a community who is already challenged by the notion of going to college. That one bad experience ripples out into the aspiration of families, of neighbors, of neighborhoods, of communities. And so I think we are not just technologists. We are not just people inclined to kind of elevate the experience of faculty. We have a much bigger responsibility to the communities we serve as leaders, as kind of, as professionals in this space.
Well said, Terry. We are just about out of time, but do we want maybe perhaps one more comment or thought?
I was going to say that was rightly said by Terry. It goes back to what we talked about from the beginning about being culturally aware beyond the boundaries of your institution and into the community, for example, and be empathetic to that. In fact, I'm sitting here, a call came in, I didn't pick it up, but it's from a student about an experience that she's having with a faculty member. And I get that all the time because we have to be ahead of that so students don't get out there with bad experience in the community. So I'm with you 100% on what you said, Terry.
Well, I'm glad you brought this back around to the student, which Elizabeth had mentioned at the start of this webinar. Erasmus, we probably better let you go so you can go respond to that.
No, I'll take care of that.
But please stay tuned, attendees and panelists, for information about our next webinar in our Hot Topics series, which hopefully will happen around later in September, I would think. So stay tuned for more information about that. Please do, if you can, take a moment to complete the survey, the very brief survey that we have, and you can see that link there that Heather put in the chat. Thank you, Heather. And I'd also like to thank our captioner today, Nicole Throne, for her great work as always. And then I'd also just like to thank our attendees. And finally, I'd like to thank our panelists today for joining us and for your incredible insights. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you for taking the time to join us. And I hope everybody has a safe and wonderful 4th of July holiday. Thank you, everyone. Take good care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.